Okay, so I am Julie Greeley with the Methow Conservancy. I'm the conservation biologist, and I'm serving as facilitator tonight. I'd like to welcome you and thank you for joining season 2 of the Rural Changes series. And it is out of a shared love and belief in the Methow Valley and its community that TwistWorks and the Methow Conservancy have partnered together to host the Rural Changes series. I'd like to start this evening off with an acknowledgement and a few introductions. I'd like to acknowledge that the Methow Conservancy as a land trust and environmental education organization and TwistWorks as a community and economic development foundation seek to protect and steward the land that for time immemorial was cared for by members of the Methow tribe. This is their homeland. We recognize we must do more to build better relationships and acknowledge our past with our Methow tribe descendants who still live here and care for this land in the valley. We encourage each of you to learn more about the past, present, and future of the Methow people by visiting the Methow Valley Interpretive Center located on the TwistWorks campus or by going online at methowvalleyinterpretivecenter.com. Tonight's topic is rural economic development. We're going to explore 2 different examples of ways that other rural communities have identified and invested in industries that diversify their economies while staying true to the fabric of their communities. Julie Tate-Libby will provide us with a brief background on rural economic development and then present a case study of agricultural tourism on the Hawaiian Islands. Daniel Center will help us explore a second case study from a rural economic development project in Darrington. These examples are not meant as proposals for solutions for the Methow, but rather as inspiration for ideas that could work here. We hope to have an engaging discussion following each presentation, so please don't be shy with your questions, comments, and items for discussion. And as Daniel mentioned, you can either use the chat box or you can use your hand raise feature. So without further ado, let's welcome back Julie Tate.
Thank you, Julie. I'm going to share my screen and I'm going to go from, let's see, slideshow. Give me a thumbs up if you guys can all see that. Cool, thank you. All right, well, thank you for having me again. It's been a few months since we last did this, but I wanted to just say, so in the last series, we gave a ton of information about the Methow Valley. And this has been an ongoing collaboration between TwistWorks and the Methow Conservancy, and our ED, Sarah Brown, is also with us. So Sarah, for being here. In the last 2 series, I presented on amenity migration, kind of the history of that. And then I gave an in-depth summary of how that plays out in the Methow Valley. And we had also completed the TwistWorks Comprehensive Economic Study. And so I gave a presentation on that. So some of the conversation that came out of that and a lot of the talking points had to do with like, what now? So what should we do from that? So the idea of this presentation kind of came from those talks and discussions that we had after that. So given that tourism and the retail jobs represent about 25% of our total economy, but those jobs are fairly low wage with little upward mobility. I wanted to think about tourism in a broader sense. And given that the Hawaiian Islands are a place that has been my second home for most of my life, and I've lived here on and off for the last 2 years, and I'm only one person, so I don't know that many places. So I'm presenting on how agriculture has transformed the islands very recently. So I hope that you will entertain me. And again, this is not a magic bullet. I mean, there's definitely no one solution for the Methow Valley, but this could be a model of something that maybe we want to pursue. So kind of thinking about what kind of community do we want to have in 10, 15, 30 years? There are probably many industries that could bring a better economy or better jobs, higher paying jobs. Agriculture isn't known for being, like a great high paying career. But it kind of, I was thinking about this kind of from a non-economical approach, like what else do we want our community to be like? And what is our heritage in the Methow? Or what are the things that we can look to the past and say, this is what we were grounded in, and this is kind of where we came from. So solutions from other communities, we're looking at Hawaii. So in thinking about a community versus the economy, a community is the land and the physical space and the people, and how when they come together, how they use that space and what it means to be part of a small local community. In the comprehensive study and in other studies I've done, people always say, oh, the Methow community is why we moved here. I mean, the community is actually number one. When people talk about the Methow, people love the community. And one of the things that people talked about in the comprehensive study was how that community is changing, and feelings of kind of alienation and more people moving in, and fear of what's going to happen and things like that. Of course, people also love the landscape, and so we want to preserve the landscape as well. So how people use their community impacts how those relationships and everything that plays out in that space. So if we think about our economy is based on recreation. And so how does that affect our human interaction in the Methow Valley? When we think about a local economy, it's how people make a living, their food, clothing, and shelter, obviously. And we know that in the Methow Valley, many people make their living elsewhere, and they're not dependent on the Methow Valley. So one of the things that came up in the comprehensive study that we can see that recreation is the bulk of our economy. Building is actually is a bigger industry in terms of money spent and wages. But recreation requires time and leisure and a higher standard of living to achieve those things. So hence we have a higher retiree community and a more affluent demographic than other rural areas across the state. Recreation also requires gear and a high standard of living to enable both money and time to recreate. So it kind of creates some of the increasing economic disparities that we saw in the study and that we're seeing locally. So there's a widening gap between those who can afford to live and recreate here versus those who can afford to live and work in the Methow Valley. So when we think about what kind of community we want, we could think about what would benefit everybody. I mean, what might be more egalitarian than recreation, perhaps. So I wanted to do a case study on Hawaii, and this is taken several years ago, one of the cruise ships that came in. Hawaii has long been dominated by what academics call the sex and sand tourism. This peaked in the 1990s. Tourism in Hawaii went from the 1950s to the 90s. I think now there's 7 million people a year that visit the islands. And it has long been controlled by what was known as the Big Five families. Those were the original missionary families that colonized Hawaii. And then eventually they formed corporations and networked with all the other industries in Hawaii. And even today, most of the industry in Hawaii is still controlled by the remnants of these Big Five families. So tourism was always viewed as sort of an outside influence. There was a huge amount of leakage. Most of the money, in fact, all the money except for wages, went to outside corporations. And it was a very somewhat culturally invasive type of tourism. It was big resort tourism on the beaches. It was also known as kind of paradise. So something happened in the mid-1990s. Tourism started to peak, and for the first time ever, it started to decline. And that sparked a huge amount of anxiety with the state of Hawaii, and people thought, oh my gosh, what are we doing? There was competition from other island nations like Fiji, Samoa, Tahiti. They became cheaper and more exotic to go to. And so for the first time, tourism began to decline. So at that point, or prior to this, tourism was organized and monopolized what was marketed by the HVCB, which was the Hawaii Visitors and Convention Bureau. And it had always been kind of branded as a honeymooner's paradise. So starting in the late 1998, the state of Hawaii passed the transient accommodation tax, which was a very high tax on hotels and motels and lodging. And with that money, they formed a new tourism marketing organization called the Hawaiian Tourism Authority, and that launched in 1998, excuse me. So over the next few years, the Hawaiian Tourism Authority and the HVCB commissioned a bunch of reports and studies, and I would say this is kind of similar to what we did with the comprehensive study and some of the other recent studies that have come out in the Methow. You can see, so for the next 10 years, they commissioned all these studies. These were long, in-depth, 200-page studies I read most of them. They got a lot of surveys. They were based on pretty high quality evidence. They got a lot of resident surveys and things like that. And they really painted a picture of what tourism had done to the Hawaiian Islands over the past 50 years. So the reports themselves are very long and filled with lots of information, and residents resoundingly spoke about the negative impacts of tourism. They talked about the rising cost of home ownership, traffic congestion, pollution, the over-reliance of consumer goods and products, and low-wage jobs with little mobility. They also talked a lot about the cultural impact of tourism and cultural insensitivity by the tourism industry and by tourists themselves. So, in response to these studies, the state of Hawaii and the HTA began a new marketing campaign, which started, I would say, probably in like 2006 to 2009. That was when I was doing field work here. And I called it the new paradigm in Hawaii, but a lot of all the marketing, the brochures and the online blogs and the websites and things like that, they really did a massive shift. One of them was called So Much More Hawaii, which was an online blog. And it talked about sustainable growers. It talked about Hawaii and backpacking and hiking and mountain biking and things like that. And the idea was to get people more engaged with local culture and with the islands themselves, rather than just staying to the resorts. It also featured stories that were focused on caring for the Aina, things like that. In 2021, more recently, Malama Hawaii was launched. And this actually is a program that encourages tourism to give back and volunteer, to spend several days volunteering during their trip. And they can be immersed in these projects as mindful or regenerative tourism. In return, they can earn hotel discounts or a free night stay at one of the resorts. And then along with these changes has been the reintroduction of agriculture. Agriculture on the Hawaiian Islands was always based on plantation agriculture, particularly pineapple and sugarcane. And those industries declined, probably were mostly in the 1990s. And so the state of Hawaii launched a bunch of initiatives to reintroduce agriculture in Hawaii. So a couple of the facts about farming in Hawaii. Although Hawaii actually hosts 8 out of the 13 different climate regions in the world, the state still imports 85 to 90% of its food. So obviously, when we think about climate change and global instability, even more recently, we've seen this in the past couple of months, food security is a huge issue for the state of Hawaii. I'm very concerned about disruptions in the supply chain and what that could potentially do to the islands. Also, the fuel costs that's happening right now is causing major price hikes in food. It's becoming a pretty serious issue. A third issue is the grain of Hawaii's farmers. The average age of the farmers are 60 years old. And so they're really trying to get young people back on the land, so young people interested in farming and regenerating some of these things. So they passed several initiatives to encourage farming. One is called the Farm to State program. And this supports local organic agriculture. This is a state program which links farmers with state-supported institutions like public schools and any other government organization, and guarantees that they will purchase local food for all of their food products, their catering events, school lunches, and things like that. A second initiative is the Compost Reimbursement Program, which offers farmers rebates for travel and the purchase of compost. So plantation agriculture really stripped the soil of the microbes and nutrients. And so the soil in Hawaii is actually quite poor. So additives are really costly and hard to get in Hawaii. So the state is supplementing individual purchases and also encouraging any kind of home composting and organic materials. To do that, they have sponsored soil enrichment programs with children in schools, kids outside of schools. They have summer programs. And they give residents free home composting bins and worm farms. So, and that's been really prolific around the islands. They also have an organic food production tax credit. This was actually initiated in 2016, and it gives farmers 25% back on the cost of production and the certification process to become organic. And the other 75% is actually covered by a grant from the USDA. So theoretically, if a farm wants to become certified organic, they can get reimbursed for 100% of their cost to do so, because it's, as we know, it's very costly and takes a lot of time, and it's really complicated to get that certification. So in Hawaii, there's a lot of organic farming because of these programs. In 2013, the state also passed a bill to support a series of skill panels to support agricultural workers. This included raising the pay to $15 an hour, and back in 2013, which was unheard of back then, and providing support services for workers and online classes and things like that. Important agricultural lands are identified. This provides incentives for establishing and maintaining land. So any land that has been deemed an important agricultural land. It includes tax rebates for landowners that provide farm worker housing or agricultural buildings on their property. And these are refundable agricultural costs that you can get back every year. And then also loan guarantees for lenders who would loan on agricultural land or agricultural businesses. Another really important thing they did was that they passed a moratorium on any ag land. So existing ag land today cannot be subdivided. Once it turns into ag land status, it can't be subdivided or changed from that. So that has really preserved a lot of the agricultural land, specifically in this area in Ka'u. And that has really helped to preserve existing agriculture. And then also this year in 2022, they raised the TAT taxes, that's the transient accommodation taxes, almost by like 3%. So it's a very expensive tax now when you stay the night in Hawaii. And that money goes to fund all of these programs and more. So they're funneling that money directly into funding these types of programs. The state of Hawaii is going to be charging higher entrance fees for almost all of their government-run programs, national parks, anything like that, state parks and things. And that cost will go to helping the islands and tourism as well. So today, agriculture in Hawaii, there are over 7,300 small farms on the islands as a whole. There are over 5,000 farms on the Big Island. Most of the farms are quite small. They're less than 10 acres. On the Big Island, there are 3,600 crop farms and 1,100 livestock farms. Lots of general farms, mostly coffee, macadamia, cattle, vegetables, and fruit farms. And then there's a whole slew of specialty farms, and these are fairly new, I would say within the last 2 to 3 years. Taro, which is a traditional Polynesian root crop, mamaki, which is a traditional Hawaiian herb, and it's a tea. It's got lots of medicinal benefits and things like that. It grows wild here. Also regular black tea, all kinds of spices, nutmeg, allspice, cardamom, cinnamon, bay leaf, turmeric, you name it, anything that can be grown in Southeast Asia, they're starting to grow here in Hawaii. There's also the emergence of a couple wineries. There's one on Maui and there's one down here by the volcano. And they even have the very first ever Hawaiian grown grapes. And I believe it's their Pinot Noir is made out of local grapes. They also have vanilla, cacao, and heritage sugarcane, and I'll give examples of those in a minute. So this kind of farm is very different than farming as we think of it even in Washington State. This is boutique, I call it boutique heritage or cultural farms. There's a huge growth of interest in food on the island and food production. There's farm to the table eateries, and this lends itself to a lot of agricultural tourism. I would say the cultural tourism is linked to heritage farming, like taro, the canoe crops that the Polynesians brought. This is a picture of a demonstrative garden down by one of the beaches. These are canoe crops, there's taro in the background, and they have breadfruit, sugarcane, all the plants that the Polynesians brought traditionally. They also really emphasize educational farm tours and heritage, like the plantation crops like coffee, sugar, and pineapple. But there's a big sense of heritage and the different ethnic groups that were brought to the islands and reliving that kind of past. So make sure I'm following with my notes here. One of the characteristics of these farms, the Hawaiian agriculture is characterized by these small locally owned farms, which offer value-added products and farm tours. And what's interesting about the products is that the farms really distribute their products locally. and incorporate visitors and residents alike into their model. So they're not really trying to get these products transported to the mainland. Hawaii does really think about its climate footprint. Some of the products like rum may be available on the mainland, but the model is really to keep it here and to keep a unique experience when people come here. And as I stated, there's an interest in food among children and residents in Hawaii as well. Okay. So there are garden to the table restaurants. Obviously, garden to the table restaurants flourish in Hawaii because of the consistency of year-round agriculture. Obviously, we wouldn't have this ability in the Methow, but even so, restaurants who source locally have to make a very strategic choice to buy locally because it's a lot more work than just checking it off on an FSA food order or something. And the HTA, the Hawaiian Tourism Authority, their branding and their interest in food production has definitely helped to create a market where residents and visitors alike both demand and want locally sourced food. So it's become very popular here on the island. So these are some of the restaurants on the Big Island that are locally sourced. A couple examples. This is the Na'alehu Community Garden. This is a community garden. It provides local restaurants as well, produce for local restaurants as well as food banks. The food bank in Na'alehu resides solely on produce from this garden, wild pigs that have been donated, and cattle that have been donated by local ranchers. And for this particular endeavor, they also cook food, or they cook meals for local residents once or twice a week. They give out food and they also sell it at the farmers market. Anything that's not sold, but that's free, they can rely on local meat like wild pig or something like that, as long as it's not purchased. And so that's how they use this particular farm. So one of the key problems with meat production in Hawaii, that's a ranch in the back, is the lack of small-scale commercial slaughtering houses. So most of the cattle are shipped to the mainland, slaughtered, and then brought back and distributed, which is a big problem. And the state is actively trying to give out grants to people who want to start local slaughterhouses. And I know we've worked on these projects in the Methow as well. This is the Hamakua Chocolate Farm, and these are actually friends of Ray and Mary Johnston, and they encouraged me to go visit them. So I did, and as I was telling Daniel at the beginning, I bought a bunch of chocolate, and I was going to share it when I got home, and instead I have 1 bar left. I've eaten 12. So this is their farm. They are amazing. They're from Seattle. They moved to the islands full-time about 6 years ago, and I can attest that Dan Carson and his partner Bernd are incredible farmers. They grow everything on this farm, including vanilla, which they have to hand pollinate, and they use it in their chocolate. They grow cardamom, cinnamon, allspice, bay leaf, sugarcane, figs, etc. And they use all of those things in their chocolate, which they produce on site actually as well. So everything is locally sourced from the garden, and the chocolate is made here too. Sugarcane used to be obviously the big plantation era sugar. Around the 1900s, there was over 70 varieties that were grown all over the islands. They were different colors, they had different flavors, they had different properties. As the plantations grew bigger on the islands and took over more of the agricultural land, this declined to about 6 commonly grown varieties. And then in the 1970s and 90s, sugar declined as it became cheaper and more productive to make elsewhere or to produce elsewhere. And so today there's a whole movement for reintroducing some of these heritage varieties. And the heritage varieties are literally from like people's farms who have been farming them or managed to hold on to these plants. There's no seeds for sugarcane. You have to propagate it. So you have to take a stalk and like literally plant it in the ground. So these are really old varieties that have been used for, hundreds of years on the islands. And their value-added product is rum. And here is an example of some of the distilleries now around the islands. One of the things I would point out is how many there are, and they are starting to sell them all locally. You can buy them at Costco, you can buy them at all the grocery stores, so they have a great distribution locally. They have tasting rooms, you can go tour the farm, so it's a whole like farm to cup sort of experience, a lot like the coffee farms here. And if you notice, these are just the first 14 that come up on a website search, but there's like many more. And so one of the things about this kind of industry is that more is better, like wine or something like that. The more companies you have, the more people buy them, the more they taste them, and it seems to attract more interest in that product itself. So also, along with sugarcane has a lot of health benefits. So they also use it in juicing. There's all kinds of other non-alcoholic drinks that are made with sugarcane now. There's at least 6 new beverage companies that specialize in ginger and sugarcane beverages, and they're all sourced and created and produced here on the islands. Coffee is a fairly new industry in Hawaii in the form that it is today. It was first started, it was planted in the 1930s and 40s, mostly with Japanese labor, like in the Kona area. But more recently, today there are over 900 farms on the island, 650 of those which are on the Big Island. It is now the second largest crop in Hawaii. And in Kau, as I presented on a few months ago, all the sugar plantation workers ended up becoming coffee farmers. So it took over where the plantation sugar left off. Coffee is a very expensive value-added product. It retails for $40 to $50 a pound, and the average profit is about $1,000 per acre. So for just growing the coffee, the average income for a grower just growing is about $46,000 a year, and that doesn't include the retail sales that they can also have if they have a coffee shop on site or farm tours. So it's actually a fairly lucrative boutique business. You can make a good living as a coffee farmer here on the islands. One of the things that they don't do because of the high shipping costs, they don't export it much. It's mostly retailed here on the islands. And again, that's part of the climate footprint and part of the idea that you can have that unique experience when you come to Hawaii. It is expensive, but local people also drink it as well. And it's one of the only countries in the world, if you think about where coffee is produced in the world, it's definitely most of the people who work and grow it never drink it. It goes out of the country and it's distributed far and wide. So in terms of a value-added resource, it stays very local here. It's worth about $48 million statewide is the income that coffee growing brings in. Okay. One more example is vanilla. There are 3 vanilla companies here on the Big Island. Vanilla in the wild is, I think, extinct. There may be a few plants left, but it doesn't get pollinated anymore because of the type of bloom, and most of the species that pollinate it, the natural honeybees or the birds, are extinct. So Hawaii has really had a push in growing vanilla. They have to hand propagate it and fertilize it in order to create the vanilla pod. So the Hawaiian Vanilla Company offers farm tours. The Vanillary in Kona also offers farm tours. And they also contract with the schools, and they get the kids in there to help propagate the blooms, and they do a lot of farm tours. Work with Idaho Hawaii, which is a state farm to school program. So this is a program that basically gets all the schools in the state of Hawaii get funding to bring their kids to farms like this and other farms, and they can volunteer on their farms, and they get experience, and they get experience in the retail shops and things like that. So that's been another effort by the state of Hawaii. My last example is mamaki. This is a local tea. You can see the plant up on the upper left. It grows wild. Hawaii Farms is located down by Volcano. And the mamaki, it actually grows wild all over the islands, but they have helped, they started regenerating their farm, and they found mamaki growing there. And so they started taking out the invasive wild ginger and things like that and encouraging mamaki to grow. And it's a great product. Traditionally, it was used in medicine. And today people drink it as a tea. It's an anti-cancer causing agent. It's anti-anxiety, and it's becoming very popular on the islands. So we'll switch gears here. So that's an example of what's going on in Hawaii. Agriculture in the Methow Valley has also been very prominent. Arguably, it's been, in the past, it was our only economy. Today, there are around 37 working farms. Here's just some of the examples that you're probably all familiar with. Bluebird Grains Farms, BCS Livestock, Be Gentle, Booth Canyon Orchard, Doubletree Farm. That's the Creamery, Crown S Ranch, Sunny Pine Farm, Local Cheese, and Wild Plum Farm. So we also have value-added products. Benjamin Pixie has been working with local honeybees. He makes mead, and he's also started making liqueurs, which are distributed at Hank's and a few shops around the valley. So we are definitely moving in this direction. Bluebird Grains are very famous, and their product is known throughout the state, and they sell locally as well. And so I wanted to kind of open this up for thinking about what we could do similar in the Methow Valley if we wanted to. And my first question was, does branding work? I mean, this was really an effort that started about 15 years ago with the Hawaii Tourism Authority, and they wanted to switch up the kind of tourism that was impacting the islands. And I would have to say, yes, the branding did work. It took a while, and there's a lot of infrastructure, and there still is a ton that needs to be done, but it is really starting to take over, and it's becoming arguably much more prominent than the sun, sex, and sand kind of tourism on the islands. Given the ratio of population between like the Methow Valley and the Big Island, for example, so the Big Island has 5,000 farms and about 200,000 residents. So if we had the same number of farms, we would have 250 working farms. So I don't know if we could sustain that locally or not. But it's and then thinking about what kinds of staple crops and value-added products could we support? Would it be heritage orchards, apple varieties, hard ciders could be a value-added product, liqueurs, frost-hardy grapes, wineries? What would it be? What kind of products could we really invest in the Methow Valley? And then just a few points on kind of how to build or building a boutique agricultural economy. One thing I think about is using a systems approach. You're not just looking at, okay, well, small farms don't make very much money, so that's a dumb idea or something, but you would be looking at the fact that we have lots of small farms, that all the restaurants can source locally or have the ability to, the farm tours and that kind of tourism that can generate, the educational impacts that can have with the school. We do have Classroom in Bloom in the Methow and things like that. But thinking about the whole sort of food system and how we could emphasize that in the Methow Valley. We also think about quality over quantity. The examples from Hawaii are definitely, all of them involve small scale farms. These are not big plantation agricultural models. And most of them have a value added product that they produce locally and they distribute locally. If we look at terms of tourist spending through value added products, we found that we have almost 500,000 tourists that spend the night in the Methow Valley per year. They spend an average of $117 a day, which brings in about 55.7 million. So if we could get people to spend even $10 more per day, that would be an extra 5 or 6 million into the local economy. And if they were spending an extra $20 or $30 a day, how much more impact could that have? I already mentioned the 250 farm kind of number. And then the related industries that I didn't mention that the state of Hawaii has also been investing in, pet food. They're producing pet food now from some of the byproducts of farming. Again, there's the farm tours, educational programs, and local fertilizers. And that's another thing that supports the food industry and could be an ancillary type of industry. So some of the things that, we might be able to do in the future could be tax credits to support local farmers like they've done in the state of Hawaii. Maybe controlling shipping costs or having at least, some kind of idea of maybe keeping products local, maybe keeping them sourced local and not trying to, follow an international marketing type scheme. Smart water usage would be a big one. We are definitely water conscious in the Methow Valley, and we don't have a lot of it. Agriculture takes more water than household usage. But again, this would be thinking about the kind of community and economy that we all want to live in. Kama aina rates. Obviously, good food, local food is expensive. I know the Kama aina rates for a bottle of wine at the Volcano Winery, for example, is $17 for a bottle of wine. And if you get the Kama aina rate, it's $14. So that's actually a pretty good discount. And so if you're thinking about whether to, buy locally or not, if you're a local person, maybe you could offer Kama aina rates to encourage local spending. And then the other idea that the one cool thing about agriculture is that the more, the better. Like, it's not like some of the other industries where you only have, one Ace Hardware store per town or something like that. But the more cottage boutique farms you have, the more people get used to that, the more tasting experiences they want to have. And so they tend to support each other. So if people, one of the things that we've been talking about here is that, when people go to shop local, if you buy one product local, you don't really feel like you're impacting or being good for the environment. But if you can buy 20 products locally, you feel like, oh, you're actually doing something. So more is better in terms of food production. So that is all I have. I'm going to stop sharing and open it up for any comments or questions.
Julie T, I was curious if you have a sense for how important like those farm tours are for selling products, as opposed to them selling their products direct to like small restaurants or businesses. Like were the farm tours a large component of their business model?
I think that they are the ones that offer the farm tours, especially like Saturdays. You can get like group tours. You can also do individual tours, and they're very expensive. I mean, it's like, I think the vanilla one is it's over $100. Like, so I mean, it's really expensive, but I mean, they make a lot of money on it. I think it is one of their staple businesses. So, and the other thing, it really increases employment. So it's not just tour operators, but it's like, the family and the kids do part of the tours, and then they have the retail business at the farm, and then they have the restaurant that's also there. So it's like a full, very, they employ 30 to 40 people. So it's, yeah, I think the tours are a big component of that.
Interesting. And is there like a communal place where you can look at all the like tours available? Like, is that something somebody hosts?
Yes. There's a great website that I was going to show, but it's interactive and I didn't think it would work on the PowerPoint. But yeah, it shows all 5,000 farms. You can click and you can zoom in and you can like go to that website and stuff. So yeah, there's a really good, and this, the HTA also sponsors a lot of that work. So they're really instrumental in that. We can move on too. We can also talk about this at the end. We were wondering if there weren't many comments, then we can just move on.
Great, thank you, Julie. That's
right.
Lots to think about as pertains to the Valley. In particular, some of the ways that the basically kind of the tax credits and the local benefit. I remember the Zama store used to have a local rate and a visitor rate, and it was about a 10% difference. And I think that's just a really interesting thing to explore in our area that could help promote ag in general. So we will move on, and we will definitely at the end, when we have more discussion and question time, feel free to go back to Julie's. We don't need to just have discussion on the second part of the evening. So next up is Daniel, and he is going to be facilitating a discussion, or I guess we call it a discussion, of Darrington's work with cross-laminated timber production. And Mayor Rankin of Darrington is going to be part of this second half of the presentation. So Daniel, I'll leave it to you.
Sweet. Thanks, Julie. When I started thinking of ideas for this event and thinking about what possibilities there are for the Methow to bring in new industries, I'm going to be honest, I was a little stumped. Our remote location, lack of infrastructure, small private land base all provide some pretty significant physical hurdles to setting up shop here. In addition, our community has a really strong sense of self, and we have a lot of strong shared values that also act as kind of a cultural barrier to industry. I'd say the Early Winters ski area is probably our most prominent example of that social pressure. But also, while these cultural and physical barriers may thin the sheer number of economic possibilities, I'd say they also give our community the opportunity to identify the growth that we do want to see here. So instead of looking for the perfect example of an industry that we could bring here to the Methow, I then changed to starting to look for another rural community who had already undergone the process of identifying and investing in the industry that they wanted to see. So I came across this article in the Seattle Times, and it struck me as the right example of a similar but different community navigating these same woods. The article featured the partnership between the town of Darrington in Snohomish County, Washington, and the Seattle-based nonprofit Forterra. And they are working together to build a near $100 million cross-laminate timber manufacturing facility. It's aptly named the Darrington Wood Innovation Center. The facility will be located on a 94-acre campus. It will create around 122 full-time jobs, and it hopes to be an economic catalyst for the region. For a town of close to 1,500 people, I can imagine that this project has been a massive undertaking. But before we hear the story of the Darrington Wood Innovation Center from the sawyer's mouth, I just want to fill you guys in on what cross-laminate timber is and why it's regionally important. So, invented in Austria and Germany in the 1990s, cross-laminate timber, or CLT for short, is an engineered timber product that is sourced from small diameter trees, usually Douglas fir, spruce, or larch. These trees are cut into boards and then kiln dried. Once removed of moisture, the boards are stacked into layers that alternate directions. The stacks are then bonded with adhesives and pressed together. The final product is a lightweight and strong rectangular panel that is customizable and quick to install. Since they are strong, stiff, and can handle load transfer on all sides, these panels are fast becoming a replacement for conventional building materials like steel and concrete in both home and commercial construction. What has environmental groups like Forterra interested in the product is that it is made using small diameter trees. This means that on working forest lands, the smaller trees get logged and sold, and the older and larger trees can stay in place. This allows for working lands to sequester more carbon and provide higher wildlife habitat. For these reasons, CLT is gaining steam in the American West. Another CLT facility was built in Colville, Washington in 2018 and is using timber harvested from wildfire mitigation projects in the Colville National Forest to supply some of its wood. In Durango, Colorado, there's a community-focused company named Timber Age that is using ponderosa pine donated by small landowners conducting fire-wise thinning projects to do small-scale CLT manufacturing and then using those products to build affordable housing. Here in the Methow, our local architects, Serious Fun Studios, has even done a handful of home design projects with cross-laminate timber. And under different market conditions, they hope to do some more in the future. So the cross-laminate timber industry is really growing all around us. And so I thought it'd be super interesting and useful for us to hear from someone who is so intimately involved with the project in Darrington and learn why their community decided to go all in on this project. To share that story here with us tonight is Darrington's Mayor, Dan Rankin. Welcome, Dan.
Good afternoon, Daniel. It's an honor and a pleasure to be visiting your guys' valley on a rainy night. Not really accessible to get there as easy as it usually is. But good to be here tonight.
Great.
So I was waiting for a prompt there, Daniel. I'm
Oh,
sorry.
sorry.
So I guess starting at the beginning, the town of Darrington has in 2014 experienced what's commonly known as the Oso landslide. The same year as the Carlton complex, and as a lot of you know, there's a lot of attention and a lot of governments coming and going when you have a disaster. That was the start of really knuckling down on, trying to figure out a direction, and knowing that we had the ears and capabilities of our state, our county, and our country to do something different and change the course of our community forever. And so we turned over many rocks. We've been turning over rocks since the early 90s, trying to find a direction. And during that 25-year time slot, we really hadn't landed on anything. We had opportunities at quite a few industries and quite a few businesses that we didn't really think fit our community or the direction our community wanted to go. We, as a community, we kept on landing in the timber and wood and biomass arena. And when we finally rolled the rock over that had mass timber under it, it had my community written all over it. And in 2015, early 2015, myself, Linda Nunzig, that's the county, it's Snohomish County, and I started really looking heavily into the idea of mass timber coming to Darrington, and that grew and grew, and we worked diligently. We traveled most of the Pacific Northwest looking at mass timber examples up in Canada, mass timber manufacturers in Canada. We looked at buildings in Portland. We've looked all over the place. And at that time, Forterra saw, a similar direction to the town of Darrington, is seeing mass timber as a plus environmentally, and the benefit to the urban housing crisis that was looming. And Forterra started doing statewide workshops and working groups to see the direction of mass timber in Washington State. And I participated in about a half dozen of those in the early times, and continued to engage in the mass timber world, whether it be in WSU or in Oregon. Knew a lot of the folks involved up in Colville. But when Forterra wanted to use product for their housing projects at the Hilltop area in Tacoma, as well as a Water's project in Tukwila, and then looking at rural communities and housing. They're looking also at several other small rural communities, both in eastern Washington and on the western slope. We saw an opportunity to create a private-public partnership where the town could create some sort of an incentive. In this case, it was the availability of fairly inexpensive land, which the town of Darrington purchased, and with the idea of leasing back to a sub corporation under Forterra's banner called Darrington Wood Innovation LLC. And so that was pretty much the map forward. I started 5 years ago with a $50,000 curb grant through, oh my goodness, I never get acronyms correct. Community Economic Revitalization Board, a state program through Commerce. The $50,000 was to do feasibility studies, not only on the product and the business model, but also the property in which we were under contract if the feasibility came through. That feasibility included all the normal cultural resource studies, surface water, all the things that go along with that. And we also, with our partner within Snohomish County, we're able to take 34 acres of the initial 94 acres and put it into conservation. Looking at it from the viewpoint that a third of the property should be conserved in perpetuity. And so 2 years after that initial $50,000 grant, we struck out or set out on amassing what would look like today, what it would take to create the infrastructure. And over the last 2 years, the town of Darrington has amassed $9.2 million through government funding and loans to develop the whole entire 30 or 60 acres of the campus with basically all the civil work, from roads to water to electricity to internet. All of that infrastructure is borne by the town of Darrington. And then the other end of that is to having a partnership with Forterra that is going to establish the businesses there. And so Darrington will gain a revenue resource through the rental of the property. And so a bit of, that resource is pretty tough for small towns to come by. So that's kind of where we're at today. The town has gone out to bid for the civil work. We just awarded last Wednesday to a civil contractor to start that work. We're also working with Forterra on making sure that their commitments and their business models are continuing to be strong, and everything's on track to have a wood innovation facility up and running by mid-23. And of course, it'll be going through the certification processes and all the other things, but hopefully developing product by late 23. So that's kind of the story behind a little bit of how I got here. To add to that, since 2014, we have so much in common with the Methow Valley. The only thing that we don't have in common is that Darrington is just close enough to the I-5 corridor to act somewhat as a bedroom community, and we do lose about 50 to 60% of our population to commuting out of Valley to work. Most of those folks are going to advanced manufacturing jobs in the I-5 corridor, whether it be at Boeing itself or a subsidiary. So, you know, this is one of the really cool things about mass timber and CLT in particular is that skill set for advanced manufacturing is right at home in mass timber. As Daniel was talking earlier, these panels come off of a glue line and they go into be manufactured into finished panels that become very big pieces of Legos, and they go together quick with up to as close to a millimeter of tolerance between panels. And so our hope is to not only inspire our young people to be able to have opportunities in the timber, wood, and advanced manufacturing areas, but also to garner reboarding our commuting population to be able to work, live, and play right here in Darrington as well. We all know, living in a small town, that when folks leave and they leave their and they're gone for 10 hours a day, they don't participate in community events or community goals. The likelihood of them being a part, being able to have time to coach or be active is very limited. In tandem with this project, we also recognized that we needed to prepare our youth. We created Glacier Peak Institute, which is an outdoor learning nonprofit that takes kids during the school, that engages with kids K-8 in the public school system, gets them outside during school, rain, shine, sleet, snow, but they also run out the same types of programs after school, and then summer programming, as well as job training programs all summer long. And I guess the backside of this is the Darrington Collaborative was created in that time. The collaborative is a group of conservation not really organizations, but conservation folks aligned with organizations, as well as industry folks, to look at the U.S. Forest Service and try to help the Forest Service bring forest restoration, aquatic restoration, and timber back into their playbook. That organization, which I'm a part of, had early successes with categorical exclusion projects with the Forest Service. The Forest Service was able to utilize revenue generated from those projects to do restoration, aquatic restoration on the Forest Service, rather than those revenues going back to Washington, D.C. Okay, Daniel, where are we?
Yeah, Dan, I'm curious, what did it take to get your constituency on board with the Darrington Wood Innovation Center? Was that a tough sell?
Not at all. That was an easy part. Folks really embraced it, from the idea that, their kids, their loved ones, their nieces, nephews, and brothers, have left the valley for advanced manufacturing jobs or technology-driven jobs and different things. It's kind of fun in the beginning of this where you guys were talking about slow internet, Methow internet. Darrington suffers from that too, very much in common. But you know, this is an opportunity for our 30-somethings, 40-somethings, you know, 20-somethings to reshore with the idea that there's more here for them than just logging tourism and the sawmill. There's those good jobs that involve, you know, advanced manufacturing. I don't know how many times I can say advanced manufacturing. Yeah.
Cool. Oh, 1 second here. Can you talk at all about kind of the Darrington when you were growing up? I know you mentioned how many Forest Service employees you guys had, and
Absolutely. And you know, these are parallels with the Methow Valley. When I was growing up here, most of, or not most, but a lot of the teachers that I had in school were spouses of Forest Service employees. Summertime employment at the Darrington Ranger District was anywhere from 250 to 300 summertime employees, with about 140 year-round employees. And you know, what has happened since that height in the late 80s is we're down to about 12 year-round employees at the U.S. Forest Service and up to about 30 summertime employment down at the Forest Service. You know, and so what that added, you know, what the deficit in the Forest Service has actually created in our community is that that fabric, if you will, that, you know, where youth and folks working together, you know, the Forest Service generally is a lot of college folks and different walks of life, and as well as seeing the forest through a different lens. And I think that our community had lost a part of that perspective from the loss of those jobs and the non-engagement of those individuals in our community.
yeah, that is such an interesting parallel, and really cool that the Darrington Wood Innovation Center is going to employ close to 120 people and bring back, you know, a lot of that culture that was lost with the Forest Service. And last question here for you from me, Dan. I'm just curious what personally you have put into this project, and what this project means, yeah, just to you.
What I put into this project, hours and hours and hours. It's a time-consuming effort, and I couldn't do it without my partners with Forterra, without my partners in Snohomish County, and individuals throughout the mass timber community. So that's I mean, in a nutshell, you know, like, you can't do these things without partnerships, and I've had great ones, and the motivation of doing what's right for our community and finding a old direction renewed for me has been really rewarding. Second part of the question, Daniel, I forgot.
No, I think it was all one question.
Okay.
Yeah. Awesome. Thanks, Dan. I know it's probably been a long day, and we appreciate you sharing your story and your time with us. I think I'm going to hand it over to Julie G right now, and she'll lead us in a facilitated discussion here with questions from the chat box. So if you wouldn't mind staying in the wings and maybe answering a few audience questions, Dan, that'd be much appreciated.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
So Dan, there's a meaty question that I want to get to after a shorter question that I have, which is, where will you get the wood from for the CLT?
So there is a part of there's a part of this project that I avoid. My avoidance is I represent a government entity, and therefore I shouldn't be really involved in the private industry side of how this works. That doesn't mean that I don't do that.
I guess my question is geographically, not like, is it going to be public or private land, but like economically, what makes sense? How far away, can wood be transported to Darrington to make CLT to have it be worth it?
So the interesting thing, and it's a very good question. I was going to go a different direction with that, but now you brought me back to a good point. Because this product is going from the forest to the facility. It does at this point right now there is a sawmill plan for it. So we're taking raw logs in at the facility. Because this product is actually an end product, a retail product at the end of the day. All the value added that goes with that has no fuel connected to it other than taking it across the parking lot. Mm-hmm. And then from that point, it delivers not to a stockyard, it delivers right straight to building site and is placed in place. Mm-hmm. So that the timber value could be seen as being elevated from the standpoint that you don't have middle people, it's end user type of product. Right now, you guys see log trucks going through Winthrop all summer long that are either destined for the town of Darrington or out to Bayview. Right now, the cedar market is very hot in Western Washington. It's going to Idaho at really substantially high prices. So I would say that my ideal would be 100-mile radius, which includes the Methow Valley. I look at it as more of a farm to table aspect. The idea that we need to really watch our carbon footprinting whenever we design these things. And that's why mass timber and rural should be synonymous, because that's where you're going to find not only the folks that are ingrained in the industry, but also the trees that make it.
Thank you. This next question is going to be for both presenters. The question is, it sounds like the new approach to ag in Hawaii is heavily dependent on government coordination and facilitation. Likewise, Darrington. Is there an interest and capacity by local Methow Okanagan governments in helping lead similar major projects? So maybe before answering the second part of the question, maybe Julie and Dan, you can just give like a super brief reminder of the government coordination and facilitation for each of the projects you referenced that you presented on. So maybe Julie, go first, just because it's been a little bit since we heard from you. Maybe people are forgetting the details of how government was involved.
All right, well, I was thinking about that. So the state of Hawaii has a state income tax. So the tax credits that they offer individual farmers and growers would probably come off of the state income tax. That's, I imagine, how they do that. So obviously Washington does not have a state income tax. So as a state, we can't offer those tax credits on that level. But I did want to say, to answer the question, as far as marketing, the HTA is the marketing branch of it is financed by the state. But again, that's a huge corporation. It's like, it's out of local control, but we actually have a lot of local control over how we market the Methow Valley. We have OCTC, which is the Okanagan County Tourism Council. We have obviously our private organizations like Methow Trails. They come out with their annual, their brochures and their things. And the chambers, the town of Twisp and the town of Winthrop, pay marketing directors, and they are the ones responsible for getting, ads out on the radios, on the west side and things like that, and in those publications. So, I mean, we completely have control over how we market the Methow Valley and what we want to do with that. So that's a good thing. We have the LTAC funds, that's the hotel motel tax that goes into a pool for Okanagan County, and then different organizations apply for that, and that has to be used for marketing and things like that. But again, we can apply for specific projects, and that money comes back to our own organizations to market as we see fit. So we have a lot of control more than Hawaii does over local marketing, but no control over probably tax credits that we could enact that I know of.
Mm-hmm.
That's my short answer.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Dan, do you have anything to add or any suggestions for the Methow based on your experience? You did get a lot of money. I think maybe, I don't know, you said something like $9 million. I'm wondering, how much of that were grants, federal grants, state grants, other.
So yeah, so through state commerce, that initial $50,000 grant through the Snohomish County Conservation District, we ended up with $150,000 basically. Through CURB, our initial CURB grant for facilities and land acquisition was $2 million. 150 or 1.5 million of that is loan.
Mm-hmm.
But the Economic Development EDA agency on the federal side, I can use that funding to act as a match for that federal grant, and I'm using the federal funding for the match on the state grant. They will go up to $6 million for economic development. There's a lot of strings attached to that, and a lot of performance measures that are attached to that. But for Tara and I are confident that we're going to be able to meet meet all the criteria going forward. And then at the last minute, we did go after an appropriations ask in this last budget cycle, and we were awarded, I think we were awarded $1 million. I'm sorry, that was just a couple of weeks ago, but done a lot in the last couple of weeks. That put us over the top. Our bids came back with a very, very comfortable contingency on that. The other aspect when we talk about government, working with our school district and our land grant universities, community colleges, and skill center here in Snohomish County, we continue to drive home, the idea where, getting people or providing people an opportunity to, engage in internships and in education in these industries. And, that's these entities aren't traditional government, but, I wouldn't be as tickled pink if this was just about jobs. It has to have that extra caveat of having opportunities for young people and partnering with our local school district, our skill center, WSU Extension, Snohomish, WSU Pullman, and STEM Snohomish County.
Yeah,
The list goes on.
great. Thank you. I know it's getting late, but maybe we can do one or two more. We'll see how long this next one is. The question is, I'm very interested in workforce development in Hawaii and Darrington to address ag and CLT. Can you speak to how this is working in these places?
I'll say from Hawaii, again, the HTA, the Hawaiian Tourism Authority, sponsors annual and quarterly workshops for ag workers and for restaurant workers and hoteliers and things like that. I actually attended one several years ago for hotel workers, and it was fascinating. It was an amazing workshop. It was all about working with the public in a demeaning service-oriented industry and how to maintain like self-respect and like how to differentiate yourself as a person between what you do for a living. It was incredible. It was a really, really wonderful workshop. And that was sponsored by the HTA. And that is definitely something that I've always thought that TwistWorks should sponsor and do those kinds of workshops for anybody, either whether it's agriculture or, tourism-based industries or something like that. And I think there's definitely room for that potential. We also have Economic Alliance does offer some workshops and things like that, but maybe something that would be very specific to thinking about creative agriculture and value-added products and things like that would be something that we could write a grant for. I think there's probably a lot of room for that in the future.
Yeah, great.
Julie, did you want me to expand on what I had already said?
Just give a little bit more on that.
Okay. So we put together a group between Glacier Peak Institute, Snohomish STEM, the Skill Center to develop a lot more of an apprenticeship program that is kind of a sub-regional program that allows apprenticeships to be started at a freshman year in high school that could last till age 26.
Wow.
And so a person after graduating high school, they can come in and out of that apprenticeship program as their time or their job would allow. And so trying to capture those folks that may not have been destined for college or had the capabilities of having those kind of experiences, are going to be able to do that right here.
And how wide of an area does that draw people from for those apprenticeships? I assume it can't just be Darrington.
Well, in like 7.5 months a year you can. So most of North Snohomish County and southern Skagit County, the Snow Isle Skill Center that is down at Everett's Payne Field has a draw from actually Darrington, the Sky Valley, and Whidbey Island all participate in their skill center. We don't think we're going to be able to reach that far, but anywhere within an hour of travel time, we think we can reach those folks.
Excellent, thank you. I feel like we should close just based on time, even though there are some more questions out there. Daniel, do you want to wrap up anything specific to your section, or Julie, before we close as a whole?
I just want to say thank you, everyone, for being here and letting me speak. And yeah, that's it.
Thank you.
Yeah. There are so many parallels to our communities, and I'm always impressed with Methow Valley, how you guys have done so many fabulous things, and would love, would really like to get over there and dig into what you guys are looking at as far as housing and our budget, our travel destination world is blossoming, and making sure that we grow similarly to you guys in that industry. Being able to know that we're in the right arena. But for this evening, I appreciate your guys' time. If you have any questions, I can be reached through town hall or email. Look forward to venturing over to the sunny side of the slope one of these days soon. Thanks.
Thank you very much for your time. This was, I'm sure, a long day for you, so we all appreciate it. And thanks for those of you who've joined us this evening and really care about the Methow. If you have more questions, you can always email us. You can use the general info@methowconservancy.org, and we'll do our best to get back to you in a not too long time frame. And then I want to mention that our second evening for this season 2 of Rural Changes will be in September. And that session will be talking about growth in population. How do we balance a resilient environment with sustainable growth? And by that time, we'll have a little more information on what we've been seeing in terms of the growth in the last year compared to the first year of COVID and the decade before that. So stay tuned for that. And thank you, and have a good night, everybody.